Hello and welcome to the Try Mechanics podcast. This podcast is all about the smallest investment that you could make that might have the biggest impact on your life, on your training and various other different elements of your sport. So I hope that you liked the last episode that we did. We had a bit of a chat with Simon. So we're going to be doing that on a regular basis, having our kind of sit down, having our coaches conversation, just talking about anything that we can really think of. So if you've got any questions regarding that, we'll be kind of roughly looking at what's on social media, what are the kind of current questions of the time, what people are really struggling with that we can chat about, because that tends to be what we chat about when we go down and have our meetings prior to our podcast recordings. So we thought we'd turn it into a bit of a kind of podcast just so you can actually hear our thoughts and feelings. It doesn't mean to say they're always going to be right. It doesn't mean to say that either of us really knows or kind of has nailed what we're doing in regards to those things. But what it is it's our kind of canvas on what's out there, what we've seen, and a way we can debate because we come at things from different angles and we give different things different thoughts. So today is all about how one little thing that you can do, that you can start doing, could make the biggest difference to your training, to your health and various other aspects. And it doesn't require a huge investment. It might only require investment of about 50p. So if you go into your local newsagents, you'll pick up or find a little notebook that might only cost you about 50p. So a small notebook and a pen. That's all that this is going to cost you. The reason this is so important is all about keeping a diary. And note, I didn't say training diary. It's all about keeping a diary, keeping a log of all the things that have gone before, or what essentially things that are happening in our lives. And the reason this is so important is because our memories aren't to be trusted. Unfortunately, we tend to rose tint a lot of our memories, but we also tend to think, well, I'll remember that fact, and we don't. We forget things very easily because if we don't require them, then we put them into a kind of storage system that gives a rough idea, that gives us the gist, but doesn't actually give the intricacies and the details. And sometimes those details are really, really important. The reason I thought about doing this, though I wanted to talk about this, was because I've mentioned on a number of occasions on all different aspects of sport, whether it be health, diet, nutrition, whether it's on injury prevention and finding out what actually happened to lead to an injury in the first place, whether it's on training. I always seem to mention the same thing, that if you go back and check the diary, that actually that can really enlighten you to what's going on. The key thing is that we are all about making mistakes. You know, we are evolution is about mistakes. We are only here because we continue to make the same mistakes. We don't make the same mistakes over and over again. We evolve, we learn, we stop making those mistakes, or at least when we make a mistake, essentially on a really basic standpoint on the kind of evolution side of things, things get stronger, we get stronger, faster, quicker. That is what training is all about. Training is kind of about making mistakes when it comes to the body. It is about showing a weakness. It is about showing the body that we need a little bit more. And so what we need to think about is, well, we've obviously making those mistakes on a kind of biological level, but we also need to think about the kind of mistakes that we might have been making in our lives that have then led to certain issues. And then in order to learn from those issues, we need to correct that. So as part of our kind of coaches conversation, I think me and Simon are going to basically talk about what we recommend that we essentially have failed to do ourselves. So do as I say, not as I do. And the reason that's so important is because we are in the sport, we're trying to make those mistakes. And you should be striving to try and make mistakes. That's the point, is that if you're not making mistakes, you're not getting out of your comfort zone, but also you don't have that potential to then improve. And the reason a diary is so important in that is because those details of how you made those mistakes become all important. So let's take a good example, an injury. So when you've got a bit of a niggle, if that's a stimulus to start off keeping the little noted diary, then that's a good thing. So you start off keeping that little noted diary of when you get the pain, where it is, whether it's pain, what type of pain, how does it... Because when people come in to see me and they have that extensive history, it all makes sense. The pattern almost always makes sense when they have all those little details. When it's all a little bit, it jumped around here and or sometimes it's hurting and sometimes it's not, it can be very difficult to pinpoint. Because sometimes, if it's hurting in a certain way, so for instance, a pain around the Achilles that comes on or is there in the morning but tends to loosen up, that tends to point towards the pattern of Achilles sheath issue, because it's become sticky overnight. It's matted itself down to the tendon overnight, and that when you move it in the morning, it's very stiff and hard to move. But some people will just say, well, I think it hurts in the morning. I'm not sure it gets any better when I run. And those things can then make it a lot more difficult to essentially diagnose and essentially then work out where the injury came from. Sometimes it's things like, well, actually, this injury did start when I spent a lot of time sitting, when I changed my job. I had a fantastic example of this recently where a lady came to see me who's a drummer. And when she was needing a little bit more, essentially, release time, she did a bit more drumming. And as she was doing more drumming, she was starting to get more problems with her hip. And she said to me, could it be the drumming? I said, it probably almost definitely is the drumming, because it's being sat in that certain position. So you need to do these kind of movements around the drumming. Now, if she hadn't mentioned that, if she hadn't thought, well, actually, it could be the drumming, most people would think, well, how does drumming give you what seems like a running injury? And that's the critical thing. So a little bit of a offshoot there in a way that this can be used. So keeping that little diary can be really important. Same as a training diary. You don't really need to use software. I don't use it anymore, to be honest. I used to upload things to a software called Golden Cheetah to analyse the data. I then used to plonk things on things like Training Peaks, and I have never got into things like Strava. But that kind of training diary, Garmin Connect, I used to plug the Garmin in. But actually, to be honest, I haven't uploaded my Garmin data for as long as I can remember. I haven't used Strava, I haven't used any of those things, because when I do a session, particularly on the bike, I essentially just log down in my little diary the power for the intervals, the heart rate, so I've got a bit of a cross correlation, and how I felt. Smiley face, or how I felt good, whether I felt stronger. And those things are so important, because it's those subjective feelings that you often forget. You may be able to go back over the data and say, oh, do you know what? I put loads of power out today on this. But what you might forget is how you felt. You might have put more power out because you just went harder. You felt better. You felt well rested. Or you might have just pushed harder. And actually you weren't any fitter. You just decided in that session, do you know what? I'm going to push a bit harder. Now that might have defeated the point, because actually the point might not have been to push harder. It might have been just to essentially do the same power and do it easier, but you got a bit overexcited and decided to push a bit harder. Having a record of that is really important. So that's what I keep. I keep a very, very loose record, very small details, but the details. As I say, things like power and heart rate on the bike. With running, I just let my legs do the talking. I keep a rough diary of how I felt, whether I've got any niggles here and there, whether I've done the right exercises and various other things before I've started, and that's pretty much it. And then swimming, I keep a rough log of my 100 metre time. So every so often, normally pretty much at the end of every session, I do a good 100 metre kind of almost all out, and I keep a rough log of the time. It makes sure I know that I'm moving in either the right direction or staying where I am, and that I'm not losing speed. And if I am, then I start working on the things that might help me get it back. So that's what I do in terms of the training side of things. I think we overcomplicate things and we get a little bit overstressed sometimes with all those things. So there's a lot of data we can look at, but actually intricacies of data can sometimes only be a very small percentage on top. And actually we probably spend too much time looking at those data, uploading it to various training platforms, and instead of actually just getting out there and doing the training and seeing how we actually feel. This is my argument around things like heart rate variability. I've used heart rate variability for years, and I went on about it a long time ago because we were using it in cardiothoracics to monitor the infection risk. And I still believe that I do mine every day, and I believe that I can do things like predict a risk of infection, because you can get these surges in certain elements of HRV. But do I believe it is the recovery metric that people should be using? I'm not so sure. I don't think we really have the good evidence yet to really see how it's any better than how you feel. I think it can be used as an adjunct, but maybe it shouldn't be stuck to. I think it actually has more potential to try and manage certain levels of overload. So I've used it in the past to overload or manage overload of things like intervals, to find out what kind of interval session causes me to need recovery the next day, which is demonstrating that it actually has done a job, as opposed to certain interval sessions that are often have almost no effect at all. And that demonstrates that I didn't really overload the body, which at the end of the day, we're talking about mistakes, is I didn't really push the body into the point of mistakes on a molecular and chemical level that require it to try and get stronger. So that's the key thing, really, is that this all comes down to using that little bit of the as I say, a little bit of a diary, just keeping a little log of things, just keeping an idea. Same with things like food. So a great example. If you want to know what foods bother you, keep a diary. Keep a little, cheat sheet. If you do this, and you can look back over it. And I know somebody who did a spreadsheet of all these foods. Every time they ate that food, they put a little marker by it. So they did a big spreadsheet of all the foods they ate. And then they sent it through a program. The idea, they were very technical mind, not something that everyone can do. But they just kept, and there's actually ways you can do this now with certain apps, is that then at the end of the year, they sent it through a kind of program that basically said, yes, you're sensitive to all of these foods, because every time you've had these foods, you've logged the fact that you didn't feel particularly good afterwards, and it started to add up a picture. Because often we don't eat foods in isolation, so we don't sit down and eat a pile of tomatoes, wait half an hour or an hour to see whether there's any response. We eat whole foods, we eat salads, we eat things together. So this program was able to pick out the fact that actually certain foods had been kind of continual triggers for these things. But actually, we can do that a lot. A lot of people find that things like, bread is a great example. A lot of people get a bit bloated when they have bread, yet they still eat it. And if they actually log down, every time I have bread, I feel bloated. Maybe looking at that, they think that actually maybe I should probably not eat it, or at least eat it in more moderation, and see whether that makes a difference. But again, they can see this when they come back to the diary, because our memories are they are fallible. That's the point. They don't remember those bits. They remember the important bits that we need to remember, and we only really have so much processing space. So that's all I want to say for today, really. I hope that's not kind of droned on for too long. We're going to be having another coaches conversation this week, and we'll be having a few beers, I believe. So we have no idea where it's going to go. Hopefully it will provide some interesting information. I definitely know the polarised and threshold topic's going to come up. I think the other side of things is kind of coaching and health is going to come up as a little bit as well, because we spoke about this the other day. So I hope you enjoyed this. If any more questions, please let me know, and we'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.